Julia, he was always the type of person who seemed to have everything under control. At 45, she was a renowned lawyer, respected by her colleagues and admired for her tireless dedication to her work. His life followed a predictable rhythm. Meetings, legal proceedings, dinners with friends, and the occasional phone call with his mother, which always ended with the same question. "Are you taking care of yourself, daughter?" Julia, he responded with a practiced smile and vague promises that yes, of course, he was fine. But in fact, she wasn't. As much as I tried to ignore it, there was something missing, a persistent feeling of emptiness, as if I were living on autopilot. She would wake up, go to the office, come home, and repeat the cycle the next day, without feeling any deep connection to what she was doing or who she was. It was as if an essential part of her had been forgotten somewhere in the past. This feeling culminated during a work trip to a small town in the interior. After a long day of commitments, Julia decided to walk through the quiet streets before returning to the hotel. That's when she found an antiques market almost hidden on a corner. Curious, she went in. The room was full of dusty objects, but there was something magical about those disorganized shelves. As he strolled through the halls, his eyes were caught by a specific object. An old key, rusty and surprisingly heavy for its size. Holding it, Julia felt a strange nostalgia. It was as if that key belonged to something important, something she had once known but was now lost. The store owner, an elderly man with piercing eyes, observed his thoughtful expression and said, "This key, it chooses whoever finds it. Maybe you know where to use it." Those words echoed in Julia's mind as she returned to the hotel. All night long, she couldn't stop thinking about the key and what the man had said. Did she really know where to use it? And more importantly, what exactly did that key represent? That night, Julia had a vivid dream. She was in a dark hallway, lit only by a faint light coming from a door at the end. The door looked old and sturdy, made of thick wood with intricate details. In the center of the door, there was a lock that perfectly matched the key she had purchased. When Julia tried to reach the door, she realized she couldn't take any more steps forward. Something was stopping her from moving forward. When he woke up, he could still feel the rough texture of the key in his hand, even though he knew it was in his bag. That made her uneasy. Who was she to open that door? What was on the other side? And why did that image seem so familiar, as if it were a long-forgotten memory? Over the next few days, Julia began to notice that her dream wasn't just a random daydream. It carried a clear message. There was something locked inside her, something she needed to face. But to find the answer, she knew she would have to start asking difficult questions. Questions about who she really was, and who she had left behind. The key remained in her bag, a constant reminder that there was a door waiting to be opened. But Julia still didn't know if she was ready to turn the handle, or maybe the door was locked from the inside. In the days following the dream about the door, Julia tried to resume her normal routine. But something had changed. The image of that mysterious door and the feeling that something was locked inside it never left his mind. It was like a constant echo, a soft voice that whispered, "You know what you need to do." At first, she tried to ignore this voice, attributing it to stress or exhaustion from work. But the more I tried to forget, the more present it became. One night, unable to sleep, Julia decided to research dreams and their meaning. This is how she encountered Carl Jung's teachings. His words seemed to jump from the screen directly into your heart. Dreams are messages from the unconscious, trying to guide us back to the path of wholeness. That resonated deeply within her. Could it be that the dream about the door was a message from your own unconscious, trying to tell you something important? Determined to understand better, Julia began writing down her dreams in a notebook. At first, his notes were vague and disjointed, but after a few nights, he noticed a clear pattern. The door kept appearing, always locked, always distant. Sometimes she was in a dark hallway, other times in the middle of a dense forest. But regardless of the setting, the door was there, like a silent invitation to something greater. While delving into this process of dream interpretation, Julia began to notice connections between dreams and her real life. She remembered times when she had suppressed parts of herself to adapt to other people's expectations. In college, for example, she had abandoned her passion for photography to pursue a career in law because her family thought it would be safer. Later, when he received an offer to work at an international NGO, he turned it down, fearing risking his financial stability. And even in her marriage, which ended years ago, she often put her partner's needs ahead of her own, stifling her emotions to avoid conflict. These memories began to emerge like pieces of a puzzle. Julia realized that the door in her dreams represented these repressed parts of herself. Abandoned dreams, forgotten desires, buried emotions. It was as if she had locked those parts away somewhere deep inside her, never looking back. One day, while leafing through a book on Jungian psychology, Julia came across a sentence that left her breathless. Individuation is the process of becoming who you really are by integrating all the fragmented parts of the self. That sounded like a revelation. She understood that the door in her dreams was not just a symbol of something lost, but also a call to rediscover herself, to become whole again. This time, she didn't try to ignore the call. He began practicing simple exercises suggested in books, writing daily reflections, meditating on his emotions, and observing patterns in his behavior. During one of these writing sessions, Julia made a surprising discovery. He wrote, "I'm afraid to open the door because I don't know what I'll find. What if I don't like what's there? What if it's too late to change?" Those questions scared her, but they also excited her. For the first time in years, she felt like she was starting to connect with something true within herself. The door was still locked, but now she knew the key was in her hands, literally and metaphorically. Julia put away the notebook and looked at the key on her desk. She knew the next step would be to face what was locked inside her. But before that, he would need to face something else, the shadow that had created that door in the first place. With the door of her dreams increasingly present in her mind, Julia began to realize that it wasn't just a matter of opening something locked. It was as if there were different voices inside her, each trying to guide her path, and not always in the same direction. Some of these voices were familiar, others completely unfamiliar. She decided to explore these inner forces by delving into Carl Jung's teachings on archetypes. Jung explained that archetypes are universal patterns of the human psyche, symbolic figures that shape our choices, behaviors, and even our dreams. Julia began to identify which archetypes had influenced her life over the years. The first to come to light was the guardian. This archetype represented his incessant search for security and stability. From a young age, she has always prioritized predictable routines and safe decisions. It was the guardian who led her to abandon photography to pursue a career in law, convinced that she needed to guarantee a stable future. But alongside the guardian, another archetype emerged, the creator. This was the side of Julia that longed for artistic expression and creativity. It had been silenced when she gave up photography, but it was still there, hidden beneath layers of responsibilities and expectations. She began to notice small signs of the creator in her everyday life. The pleasure she felt arranging flowers in a vase, the admiration for works of art in galleries, the subconscious desire to capture moments with her cell phone camera. Then there was the explorer, an archetype that Julia barely recognized in herself. It appeared in old memories. That time she wanted to travel alone to Europe at age 25, but decided against it for fear of the unknown. Or when he refused the offer from the international NGO, although he secretly dreamed of discovering new cultures and humanitarian causes. The explorer was the part of her that craved adventure, freedom, and discovery, qualities she had sacrificed in the name of safety. Julia, he began to see these archetypes not as enemies of each other, but as parts of a whole. They coexisted within it, sometimes in harmony, other times in conflict. She realized that the guardian had dominated her life for years, keeping her trapped in a comfort zone that was, in truth, anything but comfortable. The creator and the explorer, on the other hand, had been neglected, their voices drowned out by the weight of external obligations. To better understand this dynamic, Julia decided to do an exercise suggested in one of Jung's books, writing letters to each of her archetypes. Sitting at the table in her living room, she began with the guardian. "Dear guardian, you were always by my side, protecting me from uncertainties and guiding me to safe decisions. But sometimes I feel like you've trapped me in a gilded cage. I want to thank you for everything you've done for me, but I also need to ask, please allow me to explore other paths." Then he wrote to the creator, "Dear creator, I'm sorry for leaving you aside for so long. You are part of who I am, and I promise to make space for your voice to be heard again. Let's rediscover the beauty of creation together." Finally, he addressed the explorer. "Dear explorer, I know you're tired of being ignored. I promise I will start listening to your suggestions, even if it means leaving my comfort zone. I'm ready to explore the world and myself." Writing these letters was like opening an internal dialogue that had been silenced for a long time. Julia felt an inexplicable lightness, as if she was beginning to balance the forces within her. In the following days, something curious happened. These archetypes began to appear in his everyday life. During a conversation with a friend, she casually mentioned that she would like to take up photography again. Her friend, excited, invited her to participate in a local exhibition. At another point, while leafing through a magazine, he saw an article about volunteering in international projects. That awakened in her a feeling of nostalgia mixed with excitement. Julia realized that archetypes weren't just abstract concepts. They were living forces that could guide her toward the door. But before opening that door, she knew she would need to integrate these forces. And, to do so, she would have to face something even deeper, the shadow that had created that labyrinth inside her. Now that Julia had recognized the archetypes that shaped her life, she felt she was closer to understanding the door in her dreams. But something still stopped her from moving forward. It was as if there was an invisible force blocking her path. A dark, uncomfortable presence that she couldn't ignore. It was then that she decided to face the inevitable, her shadow. Jung described the shadow as that part of us that we repress out of fear, shame, or inadequacy. For Julia, this concept was frightening. She had always prided herself on being controlled, practical, and rational. The idea that there was a part of her that was chaotic, vulnerable, or even hostile was difficult to accept. But I knew that, to open the door, I would need to confront these forgotten parts. He began by writing a letter to his shadow, as he had done with his archetypes. Sitting at the table, with her notebook open, she hesitated for a moment before beginning. Dear Shadow, I know you are there. For years, I have tried to hide you, stifle your voices and avoid your impulses. Sometimes you show up as inexplicable anger, other times as deep sadness or paralyzing insecurity. I don't understand you, but I know you are part of me. I want to get to know you better, even if it's uncomfortable. As she wrote, Julia began to remember moments when her shadow had manifested itself. She remembered the time she yelled at her team in the office, frustrated over something that wasn't their fault. She remembered the nights she cried alone, without knowing exactly why. And she remembered all the opportunities she passed up for fear of failing or being judged. These memories led her to a painful conclusion. Her shadow wasn't just a collection of negative emotions. She also harbored repressed potentialities, talents, desires, and passions that Julia had abandoned for fear of being vulnerable. Photography, for example, was not just a lost hobby. It was a creative expression she feared wasn't good enough to share with the world. International volunteering wasn't just a distant dream. It was a call to explore a greater purpose, something she didn't think she could achieve. Julia began practicing exercises to integrate her shadow. A technique she found in a book suggested that she imagine her shadow as a physical figure next to her. During a guided meditation, she visualized a woman shrouded in shadow, with piercing eyes and a defensive posture. At first, he felt scared, but little by little, he began to talk to her mentally. "Why are you so mad?" asked Julia. The shadow replied in his mind, "Because you hid me for years, because you ran away from who you really are." That answer hit her like a punch in the stomach. It was true. She had spent her entire life trying to be someone others approved of, stifling any part of herself that didn't fit this idealized image. But now, for the first time, she was willing to listen. Over time, Julia began to realize that her shadow was not her enemy. On the contrary, it carried important messages about who Julia really was. The anger that sometimes arose was not just destructive. It was a sign that something in his life needed to change. The sadness she felt was not an emotional failure. It was a reminder that she longed for something deeper. And the insecurity that paralyzed her was not a weakness. It was an invitation to take risks and grow. One night, while reflecting on all this, Julia looked again at the old key on her desk. Now, she understood that that key was not just a physical object. It was a symbol of her courage to face her own darkness, to integrate her shadow and become more whole. But even with this new understanding, Julia knew there was still a long way to go. The door was still locked, and she would need more than courage to open it. Perhaps it was necessary to find hidden meanings in life's coincidences, something Jung called synchronicity. As the shadow began to integrate into her consciousness, Julia felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if an invisible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. However, she knew there was still something more to discover. The door in his dreams remained locked, and the key on his desk seemed to pulse with a silent energy, as if it were waiting for the right moment. It was then that coincidences began to happen, events so unlikely that they seemed straight out of a fairy tale. Jung called this synchronicity, significant moments when the universe seems to conspire to guide us toward our purpose. For Julia, These synchronicities became beacons, illuminating the path she needed to follow. The first coincidence occurred in a cafe where she used to go on Saturdays. As I leafed through a book on Greek mythology that I had bought on impulse, a sentence jumped off the page. The labyrinth is both a prison and a path, that echoed deep within her. It wasn't exactly like the dream with the door, but it was connected. The labyrinth represented his internal journey, full of curves, dead ends, and difficult choices. And at the center was the promise of something valuable, his true essence. On the same day, while walking back home, Julia found a woman sitting on a park bench. She seemed lost in thought, holding a sketchbook. Curious, Julia approached and started a conversation. He discovered that the woman was a visual artist who worked with symbolic collages, creating pieces that explored themes such as memory, identity, and transformation. During the conversation, the artist mentioned something that left Julia goosebumps. Sometimes our lives are like locked doors, but the key has always been within us. We just need to remember where to look. Those words were almost identical to what the antique store owner had said when she bought the key. Julia felt a chill run down her spine. Was that woman part of some larger message? Or was his mind simply connecting dots that had always been there? The coincidences didn't stop there. The following week, Julia received an unexpected invitation from a childhood friend, Clara, with whom she hadn't spoken for years. Clara had organized a photography exhibition and wanted Julia to participate. "I remember how you loved taking pictures when we were young," Clara wrote. "I think it's time to share your vision with the world." Julia hesitated. Photography was something she had abandoned decades ago. But at the same time, he felt a twinge of excitement. Perhaps this was exactly what she needed. A concrete step towards the integration of her creator and explorer. He decided to accept the invitation. While preparing her photos for the exhibition, Julia began to notice patterns in her images. Many of them captured doors, windows, and passages, symbols of transition and possibility. It was as if, unconsciously, she was already exploring the concept of opening new paths in her life. One of the photos in particular caught his attention. It was an old image, taken during a trip she took years ago. It showed an ancient wooden door, covered in intricate details. She looked almost identical on the doorstep of his dreams. When Julia realized this, she felt a lump in her throat. It was as if the universe was telling him something clear. The door was not just an external symbol. She was already inside herself. In the days leading up to the exhibition, Julia began to understand that synchronicities were not just random coincidences. They were messages from the unconscious, guiding her towards wholeness. Each event, each encounter, each image was a fragment of a larger mosaic that was beginning to form. On the night of the exhibition, Julia was nervous, but also excited. When the first visitors began to arrive, she noticed something extraordinary. The photo of the old door was illuminated by a soft light, as if it were real. While observing that image, Julia had an epiphany. Maybe the door didn't need to be physically opened. Maybe it was already open inside her. On the night of the exhibition, Julia was surrounded by people who admired her photographs. They asked questions, praised his creativity, and shared their own interpretations of the images. But as she smiled and chatted with visitors, a part of her was distant, as if she was waiting for something deeper to happen. As the crowd began to thin out, she found herself alone in front of the photo of the old door. The soft light that illuminated it seemed to pulse, as if it were alive. Julia felt a shiver run through her body. It was as if that image was calling to her, inviting her to something greater. She took the old key from her bag and held it in her hands. The feeling was different now. It was no longer just a curious object purchased at an antique market. It was an extension of herself, a symbol of her journey to that point. Inspired by a force she couldn't explain, Julia closed her eyes and visualized the door in her mind. This time, it wasn't locked away or distant. It was there, within reach of his hand. Julia took a deep breath and imagined herself turning the key in the lock. A click echoed in his mind, clear and definitive. Slowly, she opened her eyes and noticed that the photo of the door had changed. Now, the door was ajar, revealing a soft, welcoming light. It was as if the universe had responded to his intention. That moment was transformative. Julia understood that the door was not something physical that needed to be opened. It was a metaphor for his own journey of self-discovery. By facing her archetypes, integrating her shadow, and paying attention to synchronicities, she had finally found the courage to access forgotten parts of herself. The key has always been within her, the courage to be vulnerable, authentic, and whole. In the following days, Julia felt a profound change in her life. She began prioritizing activities that fed her soul, like taking up photography again and planning a volunteer trip abroad. At work, she began to lead with more empathy, recognizing that her strength came not only from control, but also from connecting with others. And for the first time in years, she felt like she was living up to who she really was. But Julia knew that the journey didn't end there. As Jung had taught, individuation was not a final destination, but an ongoing process. There would be new doors to open, new shadows to integrate, and new paths to explore. And that didn't scare her anymore. On the contrary, she was excited to continue discovering who she was. On the last day of the exhibition, Julia wrote a note to herself and placed it next to the photo of the door. It said, "Dear Julia, you found the courage to open the first door. Remember, there are many more waiting for you. Continue listening to your intuition, honoring your shadow, and following the synchronicities. You are infinite, complex, and beautiful, exactly as you should be." As she put away the notebook, she smiled. He knew that the key to becoming who he really was already in his hands. All he had to do was use it. Subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this, full of emotion, wisdom, and insights that can transform your life. Leave your like so that more people can find you and be inspired too. Comment below which part of this story resonated with you the most. I'd love to know your opinion. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Perhaps you are helping this person take the first step on their own journey of self-discovery. And remember, each of us carries light and shadow within us. By embracing all parts of ourselves, we become more whole, stronger, and more authentic. Join me on this journey of transformation. See you in the next video.